Good morning, everyone. I would like to record this message to you because I feel very strongly about something that we talked about last night. And it's not so much about the absolute content, it's the presentation. And it regards a video that I chose to include and to play during the class and to discuss as a presentation on the idea of bias. And I hope that everyone understands my intent and my idea was to present the fact that we all do have bias in many ways and how it affects the decision-making process. It's just inevitable. And one of the media that I chose to include was the TED Talk, the speech by the Human Resources Executive, Kristen Pressner, and where she talked about how she had self-discovered a bias and she felt that she was biased against women leaders. And that's not the issue either. What the issue is some of the terminology she used to describe the term bias. And also, I would like to take the liberty of saying, at the end of the video, she encouraged everyone to say, when you're uncomfortable with something, you need to address it. You need to analyze it and see what the discomfort level is, and then see if you can deal with it. So, not only am I going to criticize some of the content of the video, I'm also taking the advice that was given in that video. And the more I went back to it, I was uncomfortable with it. And I would like to just give you my impression of what I really wanted to do and challenge my own beliefs a little bit. Okay? So, when Ms. Pressner, in her presentation, she very early on came in and she said, well, gee, I discovered that I have a bias. And suddenly we were talking about, the whole message of the thing was unconscious bias. Sometimes we don't know it. We're not aware of it. We sort of know it, but we don't react to it because it's a natural part of our behavior. And what troubled me in the end, what I discovered when I watched it about 3 more times, and I had watched it a number of times before I even decided to use it, was the words she used to define bias. She used these words to define unconscious. She used the words comatose, paralyzed, and senseless. And as she further discussed it, she continued to use the word senseless. And I'm afraid that maybe in the technical, maybe even physical definition, it might be correct. It has a connotation. And it's very negative. Extremely negative, in my opinion. She also used, at the same slide, the same point in the video, she used the terms bigotry, intolerance, and unfairness to describe bias. Well, these are all very, very negative concepts, very, very negative behaviors. And in my opinion, they are subject to question as statements of fact. Because, in my opinion, bias is merely a habit of thought. It's an attitude. And a habit of thought is formed in many different ways. You saw in the beginning of the video, she actually talked about how the brain takes shortcuts and how we use heuristics to form quick ways of thinking. And we know that bias comes from long exposure to certain attitudes. We sometimes take actions that reinforce our biases. But to just go ahead and say, I'm going to use the words senseless, intolerant, bigot, and unfair, and being just comatose and paralyzed in my thinking, is not what I want to contend, that I'm going to contend is the absolute picture of bias. Bias is a habit of thought about anything and everything. We all have them. We went then on to do a presentation of 12 very common cognitive biases and how they can affect your decision making. But I really wanted to express my discomfort with the speech that was given, and that if it made any of you uncomfortable, actually, good. When something makes you uncomfortable, you need to challenge it. And you need to speak up, and you need to make a statement of what you really are thinking. Because in the end, that's what we're all about here. We're in an educational institution, in an educational process, and we are attempting to illustrate actual principles at work. No one's trying to tell anybody how to think, right? Or what to think, more properly. We're telling you how we do think and how we need to understand that, particularly in this stage in our business education. So once again, the whole idea was to illustrate the concept of bias. And maybe we should substitute the idea of attitude. And attitudes and biases are habits of thought. And they are not necessarily negative. And the more I reviewed it, I found the presentation not to be accomplishing my goals. And I wanted to make that clear, and I hope you take the time to consider it yourself, and I thank you for your attention. Okay? Thanks again.